And then stress. There's very clear literature that when we're under stress, we don't remember as much. It's harder to make those neural connections. And then infections. There's a very, I actually don't even know if someone has connected this as a cause, but certainly correlated. We see in autopsy reports, the brains of people with these degenerative diseases, whether they're Lewy body or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, there are viruses and bacteria in these tangles, in the neurofibrillary tangles or in these plaques.
Welcome to the Peptides and Longevity Podcast, redefining aging and transforming health. Each week, Dr. Kent Holtorf will dive into groundbreaking science, innovative therapies, and the future of health and longevity. Alongside visionary physicians and experts, we'll explore how peptides, cutting-edge medicine, and lifestyle strategies can redefine the way we age. Get ready to transform your health, optimize your vitality, and unlock the secrets to a longer, healthier life. Let's get started.
Hi, this is Dr. Ken Holtorf with another episode. Today, we are fortunate to have Dr. Heather Sandison with us, and she's going to be talking about integrating peptides for optimal brain optimization, or for comprehensive brain optimization. Got a double optimization there. But I'm very excited to speak with her. She's well-known, see her at many conferences, and she trains doctors and speaks about all our unique topics. And we'll get in, I'm sure we're going to learn a lot about how to fix some of the toughest patients, especially the neurodegenerative and cognitive problems that are so prevalent and so poorly treated today. She's a founder and the medical director of the North County Natural Medicine and founder of Marama, which is a residential facility, which I imagine takes up a lot of time and is tough to run. She specializes in, again, neurocognitive medicine and neurohacking, which I love that term. She has brain to specifically address imbalances that affect the brain, including autism, ADD, ADHD, depression, anxiety, and Alzheimer's. She is trained with some of the top names in the country and around the world, Dale Brenderson, Dr. Neil Nathan, Dr. Bill Walsh, and Richie Shoemaker, who's a little tough to work with. In addition to regularly attending and speaking on integrative medicine conferences across the country and throughout the year. Her healing philosophy centers around taking deep dives into treating the cause of the imbalance in the body, including toxic burden, nutrient balance, stress management, structural integration, infection resolution. So it really looks at the whole body, which I think is key with so many illnesses now. She believes the power of the body heal itself. Dr. Sandison's passion to guide and support patients as they co-create strong foundations for optimal health through sustainable lifestyle changes and the best medical interventions to support balance of the body. I think the patient has to be an active participant or it just doesn't work. She's dedicated to learning all there is to know about the brain, health, and considers her amazing patients at NCNM and residents at the Marana Residential Center. Some of her very best teachers. Very interesting. Sounds very humble, and you can learn a lot if you listen to your patients. She's been awarded a research grant, which are very tough to get, to study the effects of individual interventions in patients struggling with cognitive decline at her center. She's earned her naturopathic doctorate at Bastyr in Seattle, and she currently serves on the medical advisory board of Neurohacker Collective and is a regular host of the Collective Insights podcast. So, Dr. Heather, thank you so much for being on. I'm looking forward to hearing all the things you're doing for some of these toughest patients with, neurocognitive degeneration and all the other cognitive dysfunction, which seems like so many people are diagnosed with nowadays, and so many people have a problem. Let me ask you, what do you think is the cause of the rise of all these problems that I don't think we had 20, 30 years ago?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. First of all, it's such a fascinating conversation, right? Is a lot of people suggest that in the case of autism or Alzheimer's, that maybe it's that we have improved diagnoses, right? That we see more doctors, we have more doctors, that there's more people in the world. So of course, there's going to be more patients. However, I would disagree with that. I don't think that fully explains the rise in incidence. So the number of patients per, say, 100 in the population that are being diagnosed with diseases, these long-term chronic neurodegenerative diseases. And I believe that toxicity plays a huge role. Now, you listed, as you read my bio, who has time for all that? But you listed the 5 things that basically I believe contribute, that can be causal, really, not just contribute, but can be actually causal when it comes to complex chronic disease. And that's toxicity, which has definitely exponentially risen over the course of the last generation or so, the last 80 years. So certainly hitting our baby boomers very hard. The other thing is nutrient balance, right? Remember the 80s when we were told that fats were bad. Well, our brains need fats. They use fats actually most efficiently for fuel. So things like ketones, we found that one of the best diets for a neurodegenerative brain is a ketogenic diet because the brain so efficiently uses ketones for fuel. You get rid of the detriment of high levels of both insulin and blood sugar in the brain. So toxins, nutrient balance, structural integrity, right? You've got to have, the way a chiropractor would think about it, you've got to have blood flowing to your brain. You've got to have the toxins able to get out through the venous system, through the lymphatic system. We've learned more and more over the last few years about how that lymphatic system in the brain is so integral and how a lot of that happens at night. If we're not flushing the system, then those toxins can build up and certainly cause that degeneration at the cellular level. So that structural integrity of the head and neck, particularly. Also, if you've been hit over the head with a baseball bat, clearly traumatic brain injuries can cause neurodegeneration. We see that. And then stress. There's very clear literature that when we're under stress, we don't remember as much. It's harder to make those neural connections. And then infections. There's a very I actually don't even know if someone has connected this as a cause, but certainly correlated. We see in autopsy reports the brains of people with these degenerative diseases, whether they're Lewy body or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, there are viruses and bacteria in these tangles, in the neurofibrillary tangles or in these plaques. In what you can see histologically under a microscope, you can find some of these bugs in there. And so it suggests that there's a contributing factor when it comes to infections. And dental infections in particular can be a trigger there. So I believe that the reason there's a higher incidence is because all of these things are more off balance. We're more stressed, we don't eat as well, we don't exercise, so our structure is off. We spend all day sitting at computers or sitting in the car commuting. And then there's more toxins in the environment. So that is what I would say is driving the rise in incidence.
All right, so you're diving deep into peptides and longevity on this podcast, and we're right there with you. Integrative Peptides stands out, trusted by over 10,000 doctors to deliver real results for their patients. These premium peptides are your key to unlocking vitality, recovery, and a longer, stronger life. Visit integrativepeptides.com and use the code PODLIFE for 10% off your first order. Again, integrativepeptides.com. Use the code PODLIFE for 10% off. It's time to elevate your journey, starting now.
I think I completely agree. And what do you think of McDonald's work where he found basically all of, he was head of Harvard Brain Bank and biopsied all the Alzheimer's patients and found Lyme, in all of them. And, I'm just thinking that everything's infectious. But I also think, let's say, we call Lyme disease, which I think is a lot of things. But I think if someone just has Lyme, they're going to be fine. It's all these other things, and I had it myself, and emotional stress. I went through a stressful divorce, just killed me. And when I lecture, I show how stress, everyone thinks it lowers immunity. No, it modulates it, lowers the good part, but causes all this inflammation.
Mhm.
And I had it since I was born, and I have the worst memory of anyone. I can remember medical stuff, but that's about it. But and just all growing up, like one pupil was bigger and all this stuff. But then just 2 weeks ago, I broke my nose, concussion for I don't know how many time, and all the toxins. Like, I'm scared to take an Alzheimer's test because I don't know if I'd pass. So generally, do you where do you start? Let's say ADD. So you also do like ADD patients. Let's just start with there, like ADD, ADHD. Someone has a kid that
Developmental kind of the things that come up as children are growing. So what I do is really a comprehensive approach. I like to play in this area of cause. I know that a lot of people will say, well, why don't you just add more magnesium, or why not put him on this, or try that? And instead of doing this sort of
Adderall deficiency, right?
An Adderall deficiency, right? And instead of doing this sort of, let's pick from the tree and choose these things that are most interesting this week, I really like to get the data. And patients need to be on board. I'm a data person. It's part of who I am as a provider. And so I really encourage patients, like, let's fill in the model. Let's figure out how many toxins you have. Are they there? And kids, unfortunately, can be exposed to toxins. It's in umbilical cord blood, right? So they can get it from mom, particularly firstborn, right? Mom is downloading a lot of her toxins through breast milk or through that cord blood. And so it's not like kids come out totally a blank slate when it comes to toxic burden. So we do look in kids. Of course, we're careful about how we pull that out so that we don't cause more cellular damage than we're trying to prevent or restore. But I just go straight to the model, right? All of these things are potentially causal. Let's measure them. Let's figure out which are the ones contributing to the imbalance in your system, and then let's fix it. Let's create balance there so that every cell, every mitochondria, every piece in your body can function more efficiently and better and create more balance. And this should resolve itself. I believe with all of my being, my religion, my truth with a capital T, is that the body is divinely designed to heal itself. And what we need to do is get the gunk out of the way that's screwing that up, and we need to add good nutrients. And we need to add meditation and these stress management strategies, because we can't eliminate that completely. And also, some stress is good for us. It's about balance.
Yeah.
That really, I use an hour and a half to 2 hours for initial consults because I treat complex medicine. Usually there's quite a bit of history to take. And then we are going to plug people into this model, and I don't want to leave any of it out because it can all be contributing.
So you're probably researching like me. It's just like, everyone's like, you got a problem. You just like keep reading more. I'm going to find that, like basically the golden, trick here. And so, like, well, let me ask you, what is the test you like for measuring toxins, heavy metals, and what are the treatments?
So I follow Neil Nathan pretty closely when it comes to mycotoxin illness, mold and mycotoxin water damage buildings. And we see great results with that. And it is a new science, so we're constantly learning more. I really appreciate the support of my peers, my colleagues, where we're always, we're all collecting data, we're all getting information, we're all collecting experience, and we share that regularly.
That's nice. Yeah. With
Dr. Nathan really spearheading that. So that makes me feel much more confident in the process, especially because it can be challenging. It can take a long time, but I see people get better. So the testing that I'm doing there now is through real time. We do recommend some sort of provocation. So either a hot shower and sweating the night before and then collecting a first morning void of urine. It's a urinary mycotoxin test. So either heat or glutathione to provoke that. We do feel like we get results that more match what the patient's experience and potential exposure is when we do that. I know there is argument in the field about whether or not you should do that, but I do support that. And then for heavy metals, right now I've shifted to using Chris Shade's work almost exclusively. the Quicksilver work. So his hands down, the mercury testing through Quicksilver is the best, I believe, out there. And then sometimes I'll use some doctor's data provoked urine testing, particularly if there's lead showing up. I think using some EDTA as a provocation agent can be helpful. And then for the chemical toxins, I use Great Plains. They have a good toxin panel. It includes glyphosate. And typically with that, some people have one or two of those elevated, but I'm looking for patterns. Like, is everything elevated? Or is there one thing that maybe is pointing in the direction of, I had a patient, for instance, there's always good stories around this, but I had a patient who, amazing woman. She grew a lot of her own food, definitely bought everything organic, was very conscious of like cleaning products, not having toxins in her home.
And everything right.
I did everything right.
Right.
Yeah. And then we ran this testing and all of her organophosphates, the glyphosate was one of the higher ones I'd ever seen. And it turns out her hobby was Japanese flower arranging, ikebana. And so she was doing this, like this incredible human. She was doing this to donate the flower arrangements to like low-income families who had family members in the hospital. She just is an incredible human being. But I would never have thought to ask her, like, is ikebana your hobby? She was up to her elbows like 2 days a week in the worst pesticides and herbicides, like the stuff that they won't even spray on food that people would consume, right? They leave the worst ones to flowers. So she was getting a ton of absorption.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we never would have known if we hadn't run this test. So that Great Plains test has tipped me off.
I have it sitting in my bathroom for
waiting to
8 months. Yeah,
do it. Yeah, it doesn't always, we don't always get a slam dunk like that. Like, okay, you've got to wear gloves or change hobbies. But we often do run into things where we can mitigate that exposure or change the exposure and bring that down. Generally,
is that the main thing? Is there any chelating type thing, or try to just increase detox?
Some people talk in terms of glyphosate. Some people do talk about there being specific things like glycine that can help to pull that out a little quicker, certainly glutathione. My approach is very naturopathic one when it comes to toxicity. I really like to open up the emunctories, or that's a fancy word we use for the organs of elimination. So get people breathing. We forget that the lungs are an organ of detox. Get people sweating. A lot of us have spent a lot of our lives, in 73-degree air-conditioned rooms and cars, and we haven't been sweating regularly. And so we've sort of lost that reflex. Plus we're putting on deodorants and things like that. So getting people breathing, getting them sweating, drinking more water, making sure there's regular daily bowel movements. I can't tell you how many times I've had a patient say, oh yeah, I have a regular bowel movement. And I'm like, okay, well, how often? Daily? Oh no, just like once a week. But and they consider that normal. That's not normal. It's not, you're going to build up toxicity. And unfortunately, we live in a world where there's a relatively high toxic burden on the planet right now. And so we need to make sure that we have these organs open. So what did we say? I think kidneys, liver, lymph, bowels, and lungs. We need to open all of that. And I think of it as like the river mouth. So we want to have that river mouth open before we start adding things like glutathione or phosphatidylcholine is another one that we might use to get the cells mobilizing toxins that are stored there. But before we jump to that, we've got to make sure those organs of elimination are open.
Yeah. And if the cells don't have enough energy, they can't get rid of these heavy metals,
Precisely. Yeah. And this is
a vicious cycle, right?
It really is. So, and sometimes they're starting in multiple places, but this is a really great place for peptides. I actually really stress that people should be at least identifying infections and exposures before considering peptides. A lot of my reasoning behind that is that the body, the neurological system, is sending a message to our cells, right? And oftentimes I see a lot of mold illness, and what's happening is that as people are exposed longer and longer, they're more and more reactive. And sometimes that can mean an autoimmune reaction. Sometimes it can mean histamine responses. So things like food intolerances or hives, or just feeling awful every day, feeling terrible after even just drinking water. People become more and more and more sensitive. And part of that is that the neurological system is sending our bodies a symptom, and it wants us to pay attention to get out of that toxic environment. And so if we then add a peptide, say like BPC, you and I both have BPC 157, but if we add something like BPC to try to get a patient to be more tolerant of things, then we're sort of overriding that signal, right? If BPC essentially is a cell signaling peptide that sends this message that the gut cells should behave like they're healthy, right? To break it down. And if
it does block the effects of toxins, but you still have the toxin. Yeah.
But if the toxins are still there, then do we really want to override that message? I think that as providers, it's important to have an order of operations. Like, what are we going to do first so that we don't make the patient sicker? And I think a lot of times there's a message. If we downregulate, if our brain is downregulating the signals that tell us to have more growth hormone, sometimes there's a reason for that. Sometimes our energy, like you mentioned, cell energy, we need enough of it. Our energy shouldn't be going towards finding a mate or getting laid, right? If we're sick, it should be going towards healing. And so maybe there's not that much testosterone in the body driving libido. And if we just add more testosterone, do we really solve the problem? Or do we just put a Band-Aid on it, even though it's a functional medicine?
That. And I find too, and it's like, like have people in the same household and one person's just, they're all, full of mold and, and the other people aren't. It's really interesting. And they usually have Lyme, whatever makes them unable to detox it or whatever it may be. They're much more sensitive to it. Even with my own situation. So my girlfriend has just developed terrible dermatographia, where you basically rub something, it makes a big welt, so very mast cell, and she's got this cough, and she has mold, and I'm negative. And we had a mold guy come out, not a lot, so I don't know if she's getting it here or food, she's vegetarian or what. But it's interesting, the different tolerances too, and which part genetic combined with everything else too.
Yeah, so we've talked about structure briefly. I talked about it more on the macro level, but at the molecular level, certainly we see this with neurocognitive function. The ApoE4 genetics and the ABP genetics, there's a handful that really influence whether or not someone is susceptible to Alzheimer's. So you can have a lot of toxicity. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to end up with Alzheimer's. But if the right constellation of things, this perfect storm comes together, then it could lead there if you have that susceptibility. For other people, it may end up being an autoimmune condition. For other people,
I think that's with everything.
Absolutely.
You might have a diabetic gene, but if you eat crappy, but if you eat great, you won't get it. And epigenetically, and I think even, in the womb, that even is transferred not to your kids, but your kids' kids, and which I think is the reason why, obesity is their kids are exposed to all this stress hormones in the womb and toxins, and like they're showing autism. Maybe the number one thing, even over above vaccines, is Tylenol. So I wanted to get that out. Tons of studies. I'm like, why don't we ever hear about this? It's crazy, the toxins that we have. So with that, so you're getting good results of just detoxifying these kids?
Well, it's I'm
going to say just, because it's not an easy thing.
It's part of the approach, right? So I wouldn't say that there's any one thing that's the magic answer. There's so often that I wish I could talk to a patient and they've shared their, this horrible story and how much they're suffering, and I want to give them the magic pill. I wish I had that. And unfortunately, it's just not that.
It's not life. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's about supporting the system. And certainly I think toxins are a great place to start.
Great. I know we're short on time. What other peptides do you use?
Yeah, so we had a quick conversation about how I really love the ones that I can get a hold of.
That's a big problem right now.
That's an issue, being able to get a hold of them. Peptides are, I would say, since I finished school 10 years ago, whatever it was now, 8 years ago, not that long, not that old. But since then, I've added a couple of things that have really profoundly changed my practice. So Bill Walsh's work was one early on, and then training with Dr. Bredesen was another, training with Dr. Neil Nathan is another. And then peptides, I would say, are like one of the profound things that I have added to my practice since, starting naturopathic, this career. And
they saved my life and have
the
changed our
results,
practice. Yeah.
they're incredible. And the sort of the philosophy around them, that what we're doing is we're looking for what's missing in a dysregulated state and what's actually there in a healthy state. So instead of focusing all our energy on figuring out what's wrong with this diseased person, we're saying, okay, well, what can we add that brings more health? And as a naturopath, of course I love that, but then to watch the results, to watch people's lives completely transform with adding just peptides, with that being the only thing, to watch ANAs, the anti-nuclear antibodies, the markers for autoimmune disease, to watch them go to normal after years of treatment is just, it brings.
The patient probably loves that too, seeing it on paper.
Oh yeah, seeing it on paper, getting good sleep finally after years of insomnia, having more energy. There are so many things. I had a patient whose Crohn's disease completely resolved.
We've had so many patients, 9-year-old going to get a colectomy and a little BPC and TB4 frag. And then we ended up later adding KPV and totally fine. And she would have had her whole life with a colectomy,
People schedule for surgery with the getting the GHKCU, that has been amazing.
And that just does so many things as well.
Yeah.
So it's a copper peptide used a lot for cosmetics.
Yep, I use it every day on my forehead for my wrinkles.
You got great skin, so you're a walking billboard for it. And you haven't used really the dihexa, which there's a lot of studies, clinical trials on that, and the 5-MeO-1-MQ mitochondrial boosters. They're just so hard to get, but we are, again, we're coming out with the 5-MeO-1-MQ, which boosts mitochondrial function, which is another theory of even aging. Mitochondria stop working in a vicious cycle. You can't, the cells don't work, and then, it just affects every system of the body, the detox, and everything gets worse. And PPC also helps mitochondria as well. But what else have you found that?
I think in terms of integrating the peptides, I tend to use them after we've gotten rid of the toxicity, and then when we've fortified with nutrients, right? Because the mitochondria, if you're going to, increase mitochondrial numbers per cell or something, if you want more mitochondrial function, you have to still have the building blocks, right? We can send all the signals we want, but if the nutrients aren't there to support that, then the peptides aren't going to be able to, that signaling isn't going to have any effect.
Yeah, well, what's the use? Yeah,
what's the use?
You like NAD?
Would love NAD, right? So NAD is so important, and it's one of those cofactors, right, that makes all of this possible. So we have to have all of the pieces, right? Again, there's no magic pill. Peptides are the closest thing to that. Well, magic injection.
Oh, hey, you make sense. You make sense.
But we've got to have these other pieces.
That's rare in medicine. Do it because that's what I learned,
The other thing is really getting a hold of that stress management, right? So we talked about some of this neurological signaling, that becoming a pattern. So what I've noticed in my practice is sometimes we can get rid of all the mold. You can move out of the moldy environment. You can even divorce the toxic partner. And then that signaling is still there. It's sort of like this learned programming. So limbic retraining is a big part of what I suggest people do. And whether it's with Joe Dispenza or Annie Hopper, there's a lot of great people. There's a Gupta out there as well.
How long does that take, and how often do they do it?
So people do it daily. And I have patients who feel better in 3 days. It is very quick.
And that's the limbic system where all the fear and
Yes.
And it makes sense. And I think of it kind of like a feral cat, where if you immediately bring in a feral cat, it's going to be like a regular cat. But if it's got its wiring and environment for a month, you try to bring that cat in no matter what you do. It's so difficult. So, man, you must have made some people's lives just so much better.
I certainly hope so. The world needs problem solvers, and that's
and their family members. My gosh.
Yeah. We need these people to show up, to be part of our communities, to be engaged in their families, and help the world make it a better place, right? Like it sounds so cheesy, but that's really why I do what I do when I watch, these families who have loved ones who are sick or ailing, and they're not able to engage with them. They become more of a liability than an asset to the community.
Oh, just think of the dynamics change and just,
it's so hard.
you've just made so many lives better. I can just tell. And how long, I hate to ask a question because there may not be an end. Like how long does it usually take? Let's say for an ADD patient or an Alzheimer's patient, depends on how bad, I guess, and what's the success rate?
Yeah, in some cases. Well, thank you for asking. So that's what we're doing at the clinic right now. We are currently recruiting for this study where we are trying to answer exactly that question. What's the success rate? If I spend the time, spend the money, spend the time, and commit to this program, change my diet, get the toxins out, do all the testing, how likely is it that myself or my loved one will get better? We don't have the answer to that question right now. So Dr. Bredesen has published case studies. I've certainly seen it in my clinic that this is absolutely reversible in some cases.
And it's scary how, no one funds these things if they want one pill, basically one outcome. And that's not how the world works.
Yeah, hopefully we're contributing to
that.
Hopefully we're contributing to that paradigm shift.
That's awesome.
There was a study that they're just rehashing these same old drugs. It's like $47 million of taxpayer dollars went back into studying one of these drugs that's sort of already been proven not to be effective. And yet people keep talking about the Bredesen protocol, like there's no scientific evidence saying that it works. It's like we have all the scientific
no evidence, it's quackery, yeah.
It's so crazy.
And you look at the studies on these drugs and the lines are like they do little things to manipulate the data and it's barely better than placebo and billions of dollars they make with all the side effects.
So my first Bredesen patient, I was not feeling overly confident because I was still under that assumption that there was nothing that we could really do. I'd heard Bredesen talk, but I'd never done it myself. And I had my first patient come in and she had a mocha of 2. We sent her home. They were really excited about it. Her husband was very, very supportive, really wanted to be doing this program, got all of it started right away. She was better 3 weeks later. It was unbelievable. I was moved to tears. I was sobbing. I could not believe it.
Wow.
And then, not everyone, of course, gets that kind of result. The easiest patient to treat is to prevent, right? Like this adage, it's way easier, it's way less expensive, it's way less heartbreaking to prevent this kind of disease rather than try to go in and reverse it. It does take a while. The analogy Dr. Bredesen uses is like this great big tanker ship going through the ocean at full speed. We've got to first slow it down and then we have to slowly turn it around and then we've got to get it going in the other direction. So what I ask patients to give me a minimum of 6 months commitment.
That's nothing.
No, it's nothing.
And compared to, oh my gosh, a progressive illness like that, and it can go on for years and years and drain the family of income and just be so difficult. They're not the same person,
It's a challenging program to implement. And if patients can do it, then they have to be
full on board.
They have to be fully on board. And that's challenging when there's cognitive decline. And so that is why I opened Marama, the residential care facility. It's an immersive experience in this protocol because it's challenging. I saw so many families suffering and they were asking me, where do I send my loved one? I want them to be able to do this, but I can't be the one. Look, I've got to go to work. So I can't keep them from like walking down the street.
That might be like the future model. How many beds are there?
There's 12 beds currently. Certainly we hope, my goal is really that we shift the entire industry. So I suspect we will.
If you show the outcomes and saves money, it may be huge. You selling stock?
Well, we hope to expand. I literally opened a nursing home March 1st of 2020, and then COVID hit. So that has been an interesting, it's been a wild ride this year. But
I worry about all the regulations and,
Oh yeah, we wade through all of it. But our first resident moved in the first week of March, and so she's been there now 6 months. We're recording this in September, and her MOCA score went from a 19 to a 24. So our first resident is already better, measurably better. Our second residents, they moved in about 12 weeks later, and they are already doing better. We're not quite measuring it yet, but talking in paragraphs rather than one-word answers, engaging at a totally different level. And also mood, just the mood changes, sleep changes.
Oh, that alone, because like they can be with their loved one and the loved one's not cussing at them, you know?
Exactly.
God, I hope there is a trend to funding these things and changing that. Because what do they get when they go to the neurologist? 6 minutes. And take this and this, bye.
And meds that don't work.
They don't. Oh, hey, you're doing wonderful work. Obviously, you're very caring, and I don't know when you sleep, but I'm very impressed with all that, and I just wish you the best of luck for the country and the world. I think you're just doing some amazing cutting edge things, and I hope it catches on. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your support. Thank you for helping me share what we're up to, and that this is possible. You know, Dr. Bredesen says that Alzheimer's should be a rare disease. This is preventable. It's also treatable. If you start early, we have more confidence. So go out there, get the testing, he calls it a cognoscopy, right? Like, just like people get a colonoscopy, we should regularly be checking all of these parameters that influence our cognitive function so we can maintain it.
Yeah, just real quick. I know we have to, but do you genetics? Do you do what testing do you do?
So, like I described, sort of with all of the elements that I feel influence our cognitive health, right? So we do all of the labs that we talked about for toxicity, so mycotoxins, heavy metals, and chemical toxicity. We do a full panel. So we're looking for hormones. I often run a Dutch panel because I like getting that 4-point cortisol. And then the breakdown of metabolites of estrogens. And then usually I run like a Cyrex or A12, which has an infectious panel. I always do a GI panel, whether or not people are complaining about GI issues, because sometimes we find things there.
The gut-brain axis is huge.
Absolutely. What else is on that list? Oh, the Walsh work, of course. So I'm looking at zinc and copper ratios, urine cryptopyrroles, whole blood histamine levels, and how that affects methylation. So certainly detox capacity, mood. There's Alzheimer's, the things that come up with the Walsh ratios and metrics there. So at least that list. And then depending on the patient, we may add other things that might be relevant, and an ApoE4 status, of course.
Yeah, I think that's something that's good to know. Yeah. So how do people find you if they want to find you?
Yeah, so northcountynaturalmedicine.com is the clinic. Marama Experience, MARAMA, Marama Experience is the residential care facility for the elderly. And I also host the podcast at Neurohacker Collective Insights.
How do we find that? Neurohacker Collective Insights?
Yeah, Collective Insights is the name of the podcast, and it's available where all podcasts are.
Nice. You do that once a week?
You know, I host it. I don't really own it. It's through Neurohacker, who they're the makers of Qualia, and I love and support the crew there, and so show up as the host and dig in deep to the people I get.
Hey, it's tough. I mean, you have to be prepared, and you have to know your stuff. That's great. I'm going to check that out too.
Yeah.
But I'm going to send you some products too. I'd love for you to evaluate and give me your opinion on that.
Yeah, and I'm excited once there's conferences happening again. I know that I'm going to be running into you in person more and more.
Yeah. If we can get through this virtual conference thing, yeah. So, hey, thank you so much for being on. This has been a great conversation and just learned so much. So thank you. And again, the best of luck to you, and you're just doing great things.
Thank you. Thank you for getting the peptides out there. People need them.
Great. Thanks so much.
Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us on the Peptides and Longevity podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps us reach more listeners passionate about optimizing their health. For more insights, resources, and updates, visit our website at www.holtorfmed.com. Together, let's embrace a future of health and vitality. Until next time, stay inspired and keep thriving.